Welcome to Stories Room. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe. Every time Samantha recalled how it all began, she wanted to believe that events could have unfolded differently if she had found the courage to act otherwise. She was already 42, yet she looked almost the same as when she met Charles. Thick chestnut hair, clear eyes, and the gentle smile that once captivated his heart. Everyone said, "You both look so happy together. How lucky you are to have found each other." From the outside, they indeed seemed like the perfect couple. They had lived together for 20 years, and their house, as if straight out of a glossy magazine, stood in a lush suburb where lawns were always neatly trimmed and roses twined over white fences. However, behind the front door lay a tension that had been growing for years. Charles was a renowned architect. His talent was highly valued for its unique designs, and workdays often stretched into late nights. Samantha was used to his busy schedule, the evening calls from clients, and the endless sketches and plans on his desk. He called her his muse, insisting that he worked so much for the sake of their family. Yet the supposedly luxurious life had gradually lost its emotional warmth. She once took pride in her husband's achievements, but now he barely seemed to leave any space in his world for her. Whenever Samantha noticed him quietly disappearing into his office each evening without even looking her way, a silent question grew in her soul. Does the love that once bound us still exist? They played the role of a happy couple in public, smiles, polite touches, stories about their shared travels, which happened less and less frequently. But when they were alone, it became unbearably quiet. The bedroom, once a place for intimate conversations, had become somewhere they mostly lay back to back, lost in separate thoughts. This had gone on for quite a while before Samantha realized she was losing herself. She felt no inspiration, no joy, no hint of the ease that once defined her character. Then someone she knew suggested she try exercising to distract herself from the gloom. Samantha decided, why not? She had never been a fitness buff, but she sensed that a change of routine might do her good. If not for her mind, then at least for her body. She chose a prestigious gym downtown, signed up, and started going a few times a week, hoping to fill her emptiness with something constructive. On the day Samantha first saw Ian, she had no idea how drastically it would change her life. He worked as a fitness instructor and personal trainer, fit, tanned, sporting a faint stubble and an energetic gaze. He appeared to be around 30, though it was hard to tell precisely, given his athletic youthfulness combined with a certain mature confidence. He helped her set up a machine, politely asked if she needed additional advice, and spoke with the natural enthusiasm of someone who loves his job. Something about him appealed to Samantha right away, perhaps his genuine confidence or his unfeigned friendliness. Their initial sessions were purely professional. Ian explained how to distribute loads correctly to avoid injury. Samantha listened carefully, trying to understand everything, though she sometimes caught herself wondering, did Charles ever look at me so attentively? She instantly felt guilty for such a comparison, but she couldn't deny how being around Ian made it easier to breathe, almost restoring the self-assurance she had lost over her years of quiet isolation. Gradually, they moved on to a more personalized course, several individual training sessions a week, promising faster results. Samantha agreed. After all, she enjoyed these workouts, and extra sessions gave her a reason to be out of the house longer. At times, she justified it by saying she was doing this for her health and shape. But deep down, she knew it was the interaction with Ian that enticed her. After a month of such training, something began to blossom between them, stepping outside the boundaries of the typical trainer-client relationship. Light banter, the exchange of smiles, lingering glances that lasted a bit too long. Ian seemed to pick up on every little detail about her. "You look great today, Samantha. Your eyes are practically glowing." Meanwhile, Charles apparently hadn't looked into her eyes for months. Samantha felt the growing thrill, aware that she was approaching a dangerous line. But at the same time, she loved feeling needed, attractive, alive. Everything changed on an ordinary Sunday morning when Ian casually suggested, After the workout, I was planning to grab some coffee. Would you like to join me? Are you free now? Samantha hesitated for a moment, realizing she was crossing a moral boundary that could turn an innocent partnership into something bigger. Yet she agreed, and that decision was the first real step toward the storm that was inevitably approaching. The coffee shop was located across the street from the gym. Despite the city rush, it had a warm ambience, soft lighting, quiet music, and the aroma of freshly roasted beans. Ian ordered a cinnamon latte for Samantha and an Americano for himself, and they sat at a small table by the window. Smiling, he asked about her family, hobbies, and dreams. For the first time in a long while, Samantha felt someone was genuinely curious about her life. Ian listened closely, asked questions, commented, and looked at her as though she were the most fascinating person in the place. The conversation lasted only 40 minutes, but time flew. For the first time in ages, Samantha felt warmth in her heart. Driving home, she felt mixed emotions. Guilt wrestled with the adrenaline surge and the thrill of imminent change. That same evening, Charles stayed late at work, so she was alone in their spacious house, recalling Ian's smile and soft laughter, surprised at how she missed their brief talk. In the weeks that followed, their rapport increasingly resembled a clandestine romance. They trained together, joked, exchanged brief messages during the day. Ian would text her, "How's your evening going?" And Samantha usually answered vaguely, avoiding mentioning that her evenings were mostly solitary. More and more, she found reasons to linger at the gym, even when she should have been running errands. Eventually, Charles noticed how his wife left and returned with a spark in her eyes. Of course, he knew about her new fitness regime, but he hadn't expected her to become so deeply absorbed in it. And he felt unsettled, seeing that Samantha spent more time at the gym than at home, and seemed strangely elated each time she returned. One night, he carefully asked, "Is everything okay with us? You've been different lately." Samantha just shrugged, saying she needed an outlet and was tired of being home alone. The conversation petered out, but a seed of worry took root in Charles. To heighten the sense of intrigue, fate brought Samantha face to face with an old friend, Rachel, who happened to attend the same gym. One day, Rachel saw Samantha in the lobby, noticing how Ian leaned in and whispered something in her ear. The flirting was so blatant that Rachel froze. That evening, when she called Samantha, she directly asked, "Is there something you want to tell me?" Samantha felt her heart clench at the fear of exposure, but lied, insisting Ian was just a polite instructor. Rachel, though not fully convinced, decided not to push further yet. Still, her view of her friend had changed. The point of no return came one rainy evening when Ian's car broke down. He texted Samantha that he was stranded near the gym and couldn't book a taxi because the app wasn't working. Samantha offered him a ride. She hesitated at first. It was late, and she knew Charles would be at home, but she lied to her husband, saying she was meeting a friend at a restaurant. Her heart pounded as she pulled up to where Ian stood in the drizzle, annoyed at his broken car. In the car, they chatted, and Ian invited her over, just to dry off, have a quick dinner, and then call a mechanic he knew who might look at his car later. The moment Samantha stepped into Ian's apartment, she was enveloped by the scent of his masculine cologne. It was a small yet cozy place, nothing like the upscale surroundings she was used to at home. The kitchen walls displayed photos from various travels, mountains, beaches, quirky landmarks. It convinced Samantha that Ian was someone who truly lived life to the fullest. He offered her a towel, a dry t-shirt, and made hot tea. Samantha sat in the living room, warming her hands around the cup, realizing she didn't want to leave. Their conversation flowed naturally, from work to childhood dreams to how people change over the years. Words came easily and sincerely. Watching Ian with raindrops still trickling from his hair as he shivered slightly from the cold made him seem both charming and vulnerable to her. Then Ian stood up, moved closer, and quietly said, "You deserve a lot more love and attention than you're getting now. I see how lonely you are, even if you're afraid to admit it." The remark was like pressing a secret button. Samantha felt tears welling up because his words touched the rawest nerve in her heart. He brushed his fingers through her hair, and in that instant, both of them realized how dangerously close they had become. She could have stood up and walked away, but she didn't. Their kiss happened almost suddenly. It was simultaneously careful and passionate, as if they had both been waiting for it. Feeling someone else's lips, his warmth, and his arm around her shoulders made Samantha tremble with adrenaline. "I haven't felt so alive in ages," flashed through her mind. The kiss progressed to more intimate caresses. Ian gently guided her to the bedroom, careful not to rush her, and Samantha sensed that now she really was crossing the final boundary with no way back. The bedroom was lit by the soft glow of a bedside lamp, while the rain pounded outside, sealing their isolation. The lovemaking that night was filled not just with physical attraction, but also with a longing that Samantha had bottled up for years. It wasn't a sudden rush, rather a slow, tender, and cautious attempt to reclaim forgotten joy. She soaked up each of Ian's touches, his warm hands trailing down her back, the soft brush of his lips on her neck, his whisper that conveyed true care for her. Samantha responded to him, still oscillating between fear and ecstasy. Yet with each minute, she thought less about the consequences. A range of feelings flooded her: long-lost desire to be loved, daring pleasure at being wanted, and an unrestrained passion. When they finally lay side by side, breathing heavily, Samantha understood she could never return to her old life without feeling the bitter taste of loss if she tried to break this off. They lay there, pressed close together. Ian asked if she regretted it, and Samantha softly replied, "I can't regret feeling alive again. I'm just afraid of what comes next." He reassured her that he would never let her feel abandoned, and those words sounded like the enchanting melody she had craved during her years of emptiness. Returning home late that night, Samantha found Charles asleep in the living room. The TV's glow illuminated his tired face. He had probably dozed off while waiting for her. She quietly passed by, turned off the TV, and went to the bedroom. No questions asked, no confrontation, as though everything remained the same. Yet inside, she was boiling with contradictions, unaware that Charles had actually awoken as she passed by. He sensed the faint aroma of unfamiliar cologne and felt an uneasy premonition. The next day, Rachel again tried to talk to Samantha, noticing her friend had become more withdrawn. Rachel felt it her duty to warn her. "Listen, we both know what you're doing. Are you sure you want to destroy your marriage?" But Samantha answered coldly that she had long been unhappy, and Ian was her only chance to escape the stifling cage. Rachel tried to appeal to her conscience, but she saw determination and despair in her friend's eyes. Realizing further words were futile, Rachel simply added, "Any lie eventually surfaces. And once it does, the consequences can be unpredictable." Meanwhile, Charles decided to hire a private detective. Too many coincidences had piled up. Late arrivals, a mysterious mail sent, a new spark in Samantha's eyes, strange excuses. He wasn't sure he could handle the truth but preferred knowing to living in ignorance. The detective took several photos showing Samantha leaving Ian's apartment with a bright smile while Ian escorted her to her car. It was a crushing blow for Charles. He spent hours reviewing the pictures, feeling growing anger mixed with betrayal. Trusting no one, Charles avoided making a scene right away. Instead, he contacted two acquaintances from a security company, Derek and Brian, to secure the situation. They were men with tough demeanors who knew how to handle problems swiftly. Charles told them he needed them there to restrain a certain guy if he resisted. Derek and Brian agreed, well aware of Charles from their security training, with little concern for the moral aspect of the job. At the same time, Samantha wrestled with a different dilemma. Ian hinted more and more that she deserved a full life without pretense, and that maybe it was time to talk to her husband honestly or leave him altogether. With each day, Samantha felt less inclined to go home. She was furious at Charles for ignoring her loneliness all these years, yet she was consumed by guilt because infidelity could not be justified by a lack of attention. At last, she summoned the courage to speak openly with her husband. One evening, when Charles returned home earlier than usual, Samantha mustered what was left of her courage and went to see him in the living room. He sat with a tablet, examining some designs. Seeing her, he switched off the screen and looked at her, his gaze already clouded with suspicion. I need to talk to you, Samantha said quietly, lowering her eyes. I'm listening, Charles replied. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it was audible in the room. She mentally rehearsed the lines she planned to say. I've been thinking about this for a while. She tried to pick her words. I feel like we've been drifting apart for years. I've made mistakes, and you've barely noticed I was here. I met someone else, and he made me remember what it feels like to be happy. Charles's face remained expressionless, but his eyes seemed to darken. You mean you have a lover? He asked after a pause. Yes, Samantha answered, trying to remain composed. I don't want to live a lie anymore. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry it turned out this way, but... She trailed off, seeing Charles rise slowly and set the tablet aside. So now what? Are you asking for a divorce? He asked in a surprisingly calm tone. Maybe yes. We're both miserable, Charles. Why keep up this charade? He paused for several seconds, as if weighing his response, then said, Fine. I respect your honesty. If you want, I can leave. His voice carried a funereal calm. But not today. I'd like to see this person, the one who makes you happy. After all, you deserve to be completely frank, don't you? Samantha shivered at the ominous note in his voice. Still, she believed that at long last Charles wanted to address everything openly, so she agreed. Tomorrow evening, I'll ask him over. We'll calmly decide what to do. She had no idea that this choice would bring real danger into the house. The next day, Samantha informed Ian she was going to confess everything to her husband and that Charles wanted to meet him. Ian grew slightly anxious but agreed because he didn't want to remain hidden and was ready to face the situation. That evening, they arrived at the house, and Samantha led Ian inside. In the spacious living room, the lights were on, and by the fireplace stood Derek and Brian, Charles's friends. Their serious expressions instantly put Ian on alert. Charles sat in an armchair with his back to the door. When Samantha and Ian entered, he turned around, letting his cold gaze linger on Ian. So, you're the one, he said. The handsome trainer. Your name is Ian, right? Before Ian could answer, Charles nodded at Derek and Brian. They silently approached, standing on each side of Ian. Samantha nearly screamed, sensing the tension spike in mere seconds. Listen, Charles, she began. We just wanted to talk. Why did you bring these people here? To make our discussion safer, Charles replied. Did you think I hadn't seen your strolls? I know where you meet. I've looked into it. Now I want to handle things my way. Don't you think this is going too far? Ian tried to keep his tone steady, but it betrayed his nerves. Yes, we're both at fault, but violence will solve nothing. Charles glared at him with scorn. What do you know about how this will end? Samantha stepped toward Charles, trying to place a hand on his shoulder and calm him down, but he jerked away. His eyes blazed with resentment. You realize you destroyed 20 years, he practically hissed. For what? For this kid who knows nothing about being a husband, but can play hero at a gym. Ian couldn't bear the insult. Maybe you should have paid more attention to your wife? She suffered from your coldness. Shut up, Charles snapped. You'll talk to me differently in a moment. Suddenly, Ian decided it was best to leave before the situation escalated. He took a step toward the exit, but Derek blocked his way. Move aside, Ian said, trying not to sound aggressive, but Derek shook his head. No chance. Charles wants you here. Samantha felt her heart clench with fear. She tried appealing to Charles. Please, let's work this out peacefully. I'm ready to get a divorce if it's what you want. We can part ways, and you can go on with your life. Don't make this worse. You made it worse, Charles snarled. He then gestured to Derek to grab Ian by the arm. In a split second, Ian realized there was no turning back, and that he might have to defend himself. A struggle broke out between Ian and Derek. Ian was in good shape, but Derek was a seasoned fighter. Brian joined in, punching Ian in the stomach. Samantha screamed, trying to get between them, but Charles shoved her aside. Stop it. Enough, she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the commotion of furniture getting knocked over. Amidst the fight, Ian fought back as hard as he could, managing to land a few hits on Derek. Still, he was outnumbered. They got Ian onto the floor, and Brian pinned his shoulder with a knee. Derek deftly grabbed the gun from Charles's hand and aimed it at Ian. The room reeked of sweat, dust from the overturned chair, and raw hatred. "If you move, I'll shoot," Derek growled, clearly reveling in his power. Samantha, horrified, realized she'd delivered her lover straight into a trap. She rushed to Charles, pleading, "Please, stop them. We're not animals. This should never have happened." But Charles just stood there, watching with grim satisfaction. Suddenly, Ian managed to grab Derek's arm that held the gun. Another furious struggle erupted as Brian tried pinning him down again. Ian twisted away, and out of nowhere, a shot rang out. In a split second, Derek flinched, tossing the gun aside as if it had burned him. Blood spread across the carpet. Ian clutched his side with a groan, and for a moment, no one understood who had been hit or how badly. "Damn!" Brian exclaimed, recoiling in shock. Samantha rushed to Ian. The bullet had struck him below the ribs. Her heart froze with a chilling terror. "No, no, no," was all she could utter, pressing her hand against the wound. Ian gasped for breath, trying to say something, but only a rasp emerged. Charles seemed momentarily stunned. He hadn't intended for anyone to actually die. Fear and anger warred within him. He dashed to the door, yelling to Derek and Brian, "Damn it, we're getting out of here." Panicked by the consequences, they too rushed away. The door slammed, leaving only Samantha and a wounded Ian in the living room. Realizing that every second mattered, Samantha frantically dialed 911 and pressed her jacket to Ian's bleeding wound. Tears streamed down her face as he stared at her, eyes dull from pain. "Hang in there, love," she whispered. "Please, hold on. The ambulance is coming soon." Outside, the wind howled, and it felt like the entire world had shrunk to this room, where a man was bleeding out, and the woman who'd craved passion was now forced to watch death's shadow drawing near. Sirens blared as emergency responders arrived, quickly attending to Ian. They bandaged him, inserted it for, and loaded him onto a stretcher. Samantha rode with him to the hospital, feeling as though her life had imploded in a single night. She hastily messaged Rachel, begging her to come. Fortunately, the medics had arrived in time. Though the bullet had damaged vital organs, there was still hope for Ian's survival. He underwent several hours of surgery. Samantha waited anxiously outside the operating room, pacing ceaselessly. When Rachel arrived, Samantha threw herself into her friend's arms, sobbing hysterically. I'm to blame for him lying here on the brink of death. I started all this." Rachel tried to comfort her, handling the calls and paperwork as best she could. But the situation was dire. When the police arrived at the house in response to the shooting, they found the living room empty, furniture overturned, and bloodstains. Charles and his accomplices were gone, but their identities would soon be discovered. A criminal investigation would follow, and Samantha dreaded what lay ahead. Several hours later, a surgeon emerged, saying they had stabilized Ian and moved him to the ICU. "The next 24 hours will be critical," the doctor explained, "but if his condition responds well, he could pull through." For Samantha, it was the best possible news, even though the nightmare was far from over. Standing by the window of his hospital room, gazing at Ian's pale face, she silently prayed, "Just let him live." That same evening, while Samantha tried to collect herself, an unknown number called her phone. Charles was on the other end. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," he said in a subdued voice. "I never meant for it to go that far, but things just spiraled." "Where are you?" Samantha whispered, terror clutching her again. "Do you even realize what you did?" "I do," Charles replied tersely. "I'll surrender to the police soon. Let them decide my fate. I just wanted you to know. I still love you, even if I did something unforgivable. There's no going back now." He hung up before she could respond. Samantha lowered her phone, staring into space, realizing this day had changed everything forever. Indeed, within a few days, Charles turned himself in at the police station, while Derek and Brian were apprehended at one of their homes. Investigations began, followed by a trial that forced Samantha to recount the entire sordid story, her infidelity, her relationship with Ian, and the night he was shot. Newspaper headlines screamed about the love triangle ending in blood, and Samantha's life became an endless cycle of interrogations and hearings. Charles received a lengthy prison sentence for aggravated assault and unlawful gun possession. Derek and Brian were also convicted for their roles in the assault and causing serious bodily harm. As the judge announced the verdict, Samantha felt nothing but devastation. Yes, she resented her husband for orchestrating such violence, but she also felt a profound sorrow for both of them, realizing they had failed to find a better way before it was too late. After the trial, Samantha lost almost everything: her friends' respect, her reputation in town, and most of all, the comfortable life she'd known, however illusory it might have been. She had to sell the house to cover legal costs and part of Ian's medical expenses. She barely saw Rachel, feeling too ashamed and unwilling to relive the ordeal. Holed up in a small rented apartment, Samantha tried to figure out her next steps. Ian was recovering from his wound, but it was a slow and grueling process. The bullet had damaged internal organs, requiring additional surgeries and lengthy rehabilitation. Samantha visited him nearly every day in the hospital, bringing warm blankets, homemade soup, and unwavering support. She saw his pain and blamed herself. But he tried to comfort her, even though he was still very weak. "Everything will be fine," he would whisper, struggling to sit up in bed. "We'll travel somewhere together when this is over. Don't be afraid." Deep down, Ian also understood that their relationship was now forever marked by blood and guilt. Sometimes, looking at Samantha, he wondered whether life would have been simpler had they not let it go so far. But passion blinds you first, and consequences strike mercilessly later. Still, he didn't want to give up or push her away. Fate had brought them together in a tragic way, and they now had to bear that burden together. Several months later, Samantha took a job as a receptionist in another city, far from the place where everyone knew about her scandal. She rented a small apartment and tried to lead a modest, quiet life, unnoticed by others. Ian, discharged from the hospital, moved in with her, although he still needed regular checkups. Their lives were drastically different now. Not a whirlwind romance, but the daily task of overcoming hardships. Yet Samantha felt genuine gratitude whenever she saw even slight improvements in Ian's health. Nightmares still plagued her: gunshots, blood, Charles's face twisted with fury. She would wake up in a cold sweat, and Ian would gently hold her, saying it was all in the past. She tried to believe him, but she knew some scars never fade. The world also wasn't quick to forget the sensational story, which still popped up occasionally in local news. "All I can do," Samantha told a therapist, "is try to move on and not let despair consume me. I made a terrible mistake, but we're all human." Almost a year passed since that fateful night when a gunshot reverberated. Ian could now walk on his own and was even thinking of returning to training, but doctors had yet to give him the green light for full activity. Samantha supported him in every way, driving him to appointments, aiding his rehabilitation, and preserving faith in a future for them. They lived simply, without luxury or big ambitions, yet they learned to cherish the small joys: a shared dinner, an evening stroll, the chance to wake up beside one another. However, life wasn't smooth. Samantha still suffered from trauma, blaming herself for dragging Ian into danger, while simultaneously unable to fully forgive herself for the betrayal that shattered her long marriage. Her emotions were contradictory. She did love Ian, but the bitter memories kept her from letting go of the past. "Do you think we'll ever be truly happy?" she asked him one evening as they sat together on the balcony of their tiny apartment. He took her hand, glancing at the scar on his side before gazing at the sky. "Maybe happiness isn't something that lasts forever. It's something we rebuild day by day." Gradually, Samantha realized that love isn't just a romantic feeling, but also the willingness to take responsibility for consequences. She didn't know if she and Ian could fully heal their emotional wounds, but at least she vowed to fight for a relationship that didn't turn into yet another illusion. They had already paid too high a price to back out now. As for Charles, he served his sentence, writing rarely from prison. In one letter, he admitted remorse for letting his rage spiral, but there was no undoing the past. He also wrote that he forgave her affair, despite the heartbreak. His words seemed paradoxical. Forgave, while he'd caused destruction through violence. Samantha read these letters through tears, but responded tersely, unwilling to reopen old emotional wounds. She had to keep moving forward, carrying the weight of her guilt and regret. A few more years passed, and Samantha barely recognized herself in old photos. The smiling woman, surrounded by the comfort of a luxurious home and the illusion of a perfect marriage. She had lived through public scandal, nights of despair, and the near loss of someone dear. Now she viewed life differently. She spoke more softly, moved more cautiously, and showed greater care for others. Sometimes she and Ian took short trips to the seaside or the mountains, not too far because he still had physical limitations. Sitting by the shore, listening to the waves, Samantha often contemplated how much they had both endured just to be in that small stretch of sand, holding hands. A man who had once been just her charming fitness instructor. Could they call their life ideal? Probably not. They faced suspicious looks, gossip, and constant financial strain. The scars on Ian's body and in their souls reminded them of the violence they had survived. Still, they had a shared objective, ensuring that the price they'd paid for their relationship was not in vain. They strove to create a future that, however difficult, would be real. At times, Samantha tortured herself with the thought, what if she had talked openly with Charles in time? Maybe they would have salvaged the intimacy they'd once had, and no one would have been hurt, physically or emotionally. But there was no going back. Their story remained a cautionary tale for anyone thinking they could build their own happiness without risking someone else's ruin. Ultimately, Samantha learned how to forgive herself, Charles, and even fate for throwing her into this tragic scenario. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means acknowledging that we are all prone to mistakes and responsible for our actions. She continued her life with Ian, treasuring simple comforts and hoping time might heal at least some of their wounds. On rainy evenings now, she felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and dread. In the sound of raindrops against the window, she heard echoes of that fateful day when she first dared to break boundaries, only to discover the dire consequences. But each time, she tried to transform that memory into something quieter and more peaceful, reminding herself that even after the fiercest storm, the sun can still rise. Thus ends the story of Samantha, Charles, and Ian, not a fairy tale with a happily ever after, but a sobering reminder of how fragile relationships can be and how difficult it is to rebuild something that was recklessly destroyed. Yet even in this painful journey, there remains hope, for redemption, for growing beyond one's mistakes, and for love, albeit in a different shape, to keep going. That's the end of our story. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on new stories and share this video so others can discover these great stories too.